How far can a quiet father go when his own daughter sells the family's most treasured heirloom for pocket money, laughing off its legacy as just collecting dust? When I calmly explained what she'd really thrown away, her hands shook and her knees buckled. But that was just the beginning, because I had one last lesson in value she'd never forget. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of my modest two-story house as I prepared for what I'd hoped would be a peaceful Saturday. At 56, I'd learned to appreciate quiet moments, especially the rare weekends when my daughter Hailey came home from college. As a high school science teacher, my weeks were filled with the controlled chaos of teenagers, but Saturdays belonged to reflection and family. I climbed the stairs to my home office, a small room lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets where I kept our family's most precious memories. On the top shelf, behind a protective glass case, sat my father's prized possession, a vintage Leica 3F camera from 1952. Walter Mercer had carried that camera through his service in Korea, documenting moments of brotherhood and loss that shaped him into the man who raised me. But as I reached for the familiar black leather case, my fingers found only empty space. The glass case was there, unlocked and ajar. The velvet interior where the Leica had rested for decades showed only the faint outline of its absence. My heart sank as I called downstairs. "Hailey, could you come up here for a moment?" My 22-year-old daughter appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing designer sweatpants that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She glanced at the empty case with the casual indifference she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, that old camera?" she said, examining her manicured nails. "I sold it last week. It was just sitting on a shelf collecting dust, Dad. I needed some cash for new headphones." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. "Hailey, that was your grandfather's camera. He protected it for decades. It's been in our family since forever, I know." She rolled her eyes. "But it wasn't doing anyone any good just sitting there. Besides, I got a decent price for it. Look." She pulled out a pair of expensive wireless headphones, the kind that cost several $100s. My mouth went dry as I realized she'd traded away a piece of our family's soul for a gadget that would be obsolete in 2 years. "Where did you sell it?" I asked quietly. "Some antique dealer downtown, Gene something. He was super excited about it, kept going on about how rare it was." She made air quotes with obvious mockery. "I mean, it's just an old camera, Dad. You can get better ones on your phone now." I closed the empty case with trembling hands, my father's voice echoing in my memory. "Franklin, this camera has seen history. It's captured moments that can never be repeated. Someday you'll understand what that means." Later that evening, we attended the monthly community center gathering, a local tradition where neighbors shared updates and celebrated milestones. I'd been looking forward to introducing Hailey to some of the older residents who remembered my father, hoping she might connect with our family's roots in the community. Instead, I watched in quiet horror as she held court near the refreshment table, showing off her new headphones to a group of her college friends who'd driven down for the weekend. "You should have seen my dad's face," she laughed, her voice carrying across the room. "He was so dramatic about this ancient camera. I finally got something useful for that old hunk of junk." Her friends giggled appreciatively. One of them, a young man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch, shook his head in mock sympathy. "Parents are so weird about old stuff," he said. "My dad's the same way about his vinyl records, like, hello? We have Spotify now." "Exactly," Hailey agreed. "I tried to explain that nobody uses film cameras anymore, but he just doesn't get it. He's so old-fashioned and sentimental about everything." I stood frozen by the punch bowl, holding a paper cup that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Around me, neighbors who had known my father, who remembered his quiet dignity and his stories of service, pretended not to hear. But I caught the uncomfortable glances, the way conversations faltered when Hailey's laughter rang out. When I attempted to join their circle, hoping to share a story about my father's photography and perhaps salvage some dignity for our family name. Hailey cut me off mid-sentence. "Dad, please. Nobody wants to hear another boring story about Grandpa's camera adventures. That's ancient history." The group fell silent, and I felt the weight of their pity. Mrs. Henderson, who had known my father since childhood, touched my arm gently and excused herself. I watched her walk away, taking with her the respect I'd spent years building in this community. That night, after Hailey had returned to her apartment, I sat in my office staring at the empty case. I opened my laptop and began searching local antique dealers, my heart racing when I found Gene Daly's shop website. There, in the featured items section, was a photograph that made my breath catch. A vintage Leica threef, described as recently acquired exceptional condition, rare collector's piece. The camera that had documented my father's war, that had captured my first steps, my graduation, my wedding, reduced to inventory on a stranger's website. Monday morning found me in the high school teacher's lounge, mechanically grading lab reports while my mind replayed Saturday's humiliation. The coffee had gone cold in my cup, and I'd read the same student answer 3 times without comprehending a word. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," said Miles Gordon, dropping into the chair across from me. My oldest friend since childhood, Miles had the weathered hands of a career mechanic and the straightforward wisdom that came from fixing things that were actually broken. I set down my red pen and rubbed my temples. Worse. Hailey sold my dad's Leica. Miles whistled low. "The one from Korea? The one Walter used to show us when we were kids?" "That's the one. Traded it for headphones because it was just collecting dust." "Jesus, Frank." Miles leaned back, shaking his head. "What did you say to her?" "What could I say? It's done. She sold it to some dealer downtown for pocket change and acted like I was being dramatic for caring." Miles studied my face with the careful attention he usually reserved for diagnosing engine problems. "This isn't just about the camera, is it?" He was right, of course. The camera was just the latest in a pattern that had been building for years. I thought back to Hailey's childhood, when she was 8 and I was fighting to keep our family together after Diane filed for divorce. My ex-wife had remarried within a year, moving into a sprawling suburban house with her new husband's tech company salary. Meanwhile, I stayed in our modest family home, taking on extra tutoring sessions and summer school teaching to cover Hailey's private school tuition and college fund. I remembered the day Hailey came home from her mother's house, complaining that our kitchen was too small and our car was embarrassing. I'd spent that weekend painting her bedroom and researching better school districts, convinced that if I just worked harder, sacrificed more, she'd appreciate the stability I provided. But appreciation never came. Instead, I became the reliable parent, the one who signed permission slips and paid bills, while Diane got to be the fun parent with the bigger house and unlimited shopping budget. After school, I drove to Fairview Cemetery, where my father rested under a simple granite headstone. The autumn leaves crunched under my feet as I knelt beside his grave, brushing away the debris that had accumulated since my last visit. "I failed him, Dad," I whispered to the stone. "I failed you both." I could almost hear Walter's voice, patient and steady as it had been when I was 12 and he'd first shown me how to load film into the Leica. "Franklin, this camera isn't just a tool. It's a witness. Every scratch on its body tells a story. Every picture it's taken is a moment that mattered to someone. That's what value really means, not what something costs, but what it remembers." He'd taught me to see worth in things that others overlooked, the craftsmanship in old tools, the history in worn photographs, the dignity in honest work. But somehow I'd failed to pass those lessons on to my own daughter. That evening, I drove to Diane's house in the upscale Meadowbrook subdivision. Her new husband's BMW sat in the circular driveway next to her white SUV, both vehicles worth more than I made in a year. Diane answered the door in yoga clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. At 54, she maintained the polished appearance that had first attracted me in college, though now it felt more like armor than beauty. "Frank, what are you doing here?" She glanced nervously toward the house, where I could hear the sound of a television and her husband's voice. "We need to talk about Hailey." She sighed and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "What has she done now?" "She sold my father's camera, the Leica from Korea." Diane's face showed a flicker of recognition. She remembered the camera from our marriage, though she'd never understood its significance. "Oh, well, that's unfortunate, but—" "Unfortunate?" I kept my voice low, but she must have heard something in my tone because she stepped back slightly. "Diane, she sold a family heirloom for headphones. She mocked our father's memory in front of half the community. This isn't just unfortunate, it's a complete failure of character." "Don't lecture me about character, Frank." Her voice turned sharp. "You're the one who spoiled her. You never said no to anything she wanted. You paid for private school, college, that fancy apartment. You created this monster, not me." The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had said yes to everything, had sacrificed my own needs to give Hailey advantages I'd never had, but I'd done it out of love, out of hope that she'd grow into someone who appreciated the value of family and hard work. "I tried to give her opportunities," I said quietly. "I wanted her to have choices." "Well, congratulations. She chose to sell your camera. Maybe now you'll finally learn to set some boundaries." Diane turned to go back inside, then paused. "You know what your problem is, Frank? You're too soft. You always have been. Hailey learned early that you'd never actually do anything when she disappointed you. Why should she change now?" The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone on the porch with the weight of her words and the growing realization that she might be right. Tuesday morning, my phone rang during second period. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Mercer, this is Jean Daly from Daly's Antiques downtown. I believe you might want to come see me about a camera." My heart jumped. "You have my father's Leica?" "I have a camera that belonged to Walter Mercer, yes. Your daughter mentioned the family name when she sold it. I knew your father, Mr. Mercer. We served in the same unit in Korea, though I doubt he ever mentioned me. I think you and I need to have a conversation." I left school during my lunch break, driving through downtown to a narrow shop squeezed between a coffee house and a used bookstore. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and I was immediately surrounded by the musty scent of old wood and forgotten treasures. Jean Daly emerged from behind a counter lined with pocket watches and vintage jewelry. He was a tall, thin man in his late 60s with silver hair and the careful movements of someone who handled fragile things for a living. His eyes, sharp and knowing, studied my face with recognition. "You look like him," he said simply. Walter always said his boy would grow up to be steady and thoughtful. I can see he was right. "You really knew my father?" "Served together for 8 months. He saved my life during a mortar attack, actually. Pulled me into a foxhole when I was too scared to move." Jean gestured toward the back of the shop. "The camera's in my office. I haven't put it out for sale yet." We walked through narrow aisles lined with antique furniture and collectibles. Jean's office was a small room behind the main shop, its walls covered with military photographs and certificates of authenticity for various pieces. There, on his desk, sat my father's Leica. The sight of it hit me harder than I'd expected. The familiar black body showed the same small scratches I remembered from childhood, the leather grip worn smooth by decades of careful handling. It looked smaller somehow, diminished by its separation from our family. "She brought it in last Tuesday," Jean said, watching my face. "Sweet girl, but she had no idea what she was carrying. Started talking about how it was just taking up space, how her father was too sentimental about old junk." I picked up the camera, feeling its familiar weight. "What did you pay for it?" $800, It's worth considerably more than that, but she seemed happy with the price. Jean paused. I tried to explain what she was selling, suggested she might want to talk to her family first. She laughed and said you'd probably thank her for finally getting rid of it. $800. My father's legacy, his witness to history, reduced to the price of a decent laptop. I'll buy it back, I said immediately. Whatever you need. Jean held up a hand. I'll sell it back to you for what I paid, $800. But Mr. Mercer, I need to ask, did she have the right to sell this? Because if she didn't, she's my daughter. She lives in my house when she's home from college. Legally, she probably had access to it. I pulled out my checkbook, my hands shaking slightly. But morally? No, she had no right at all. Jean accepted my check with visible reluctance. I'm sorry you have to pay for your own family's property. That girl needs to learn some hard lessons about respect. As I carried the camera back to my car, Jean's words echoed in my mind, hard lessons about respect. I'd been trying to teach Hailey about respect for years, but my methods clearly weren't working. Maybe it was time for a different approach. That evening, I drove to Hailey's off-campus apartment, a modern complex that catered to students whose parents could afford the premium rent. I'd been paying for her 2-bedroom unit for 3 years, along with her meal plan, textbooks, and generous monthly allowance. She answered the door wearing the expensive headphones, nodding along to music I couldn't hear. When she saw me, she pulled them off with obvious annoyance. Dad? What are you doing here? I have a study group in an hour. I held up the camera case. I got it back. Her face showed a flicker of confusion, then recognition. You bought back the camera? Dad, that's so stupid. I told you it was just collecting dust. I know. I stepped into her apartment, taking in the expensive furniture I'd helped pay for, the designer clothes draped over chairs, the latest gaming console connected to a massive flat-screen TV. Hailey, I need you to give me the $800 you got for it. She stared at me as if I'd asked her to fly to the moon. What? Dad, I already spent that money. Besides, you got your precious camera back, so what's the problem? The problem is that you sold something that didn't belong to you. The problem is that you showed no respect for your grandfather's memory or our family's history. The problem is that you cost me $800 for something that should never have left our house. Hailey crossed her arms, her expression shifting from confusion to defiance. I live in that house too, Dad, and that camera was just sitting there doing nothing. At least now it's with someone who actually wants it. I want you to pay me back the $800. She laughed. Actually laughed. Are you serious? Dad, I'm a college student. I don't have that kind of money lying around. Besides, you make it sound like I committed some crime. It was just a camera. It was your grandfather's camera. It was a piece of our family's history. It was an old piece of junk that nobody cared about until I did something useful with it. Her voice rose, taking on the petulant tone I'd heard too many times before. God, Dad, you're being so dramatic about this. It's not like I burned down the house. I stood there in her expensive apartment, surrounded by things I'd worked extra hours to provide, and felt something cold settle in my chest. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to pay me back. She wasn't even going to acknowledge that she'd done anything wrong. I see, I said quietly. Good. I'm glad you finally get it. She started to put her headphones back on, dismissing me. I really do have to study, Dad. Can we talk about this later? I left without another word, but as I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the apartment building, the luxury cars in the parking lot, the life I'd been funding without question for years. The next day, I stopped by my bank during lunch. I asked for printouts of all the tuition payments I'd made over the past 4 years, all the rent checks, all the transfers to Hailey's account. The stack of papers was thicker than I'd expected, thousands upon thousands of dollars, representing years of extra work and careful budgeting. That afternoon, I watched Hailey at the university bookstore, using her debit card to buy designer notebooks and a leather backpack that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. She moved through the store with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about money, never questioned where her next meal or tuition payment would come from. She was spending the camera money, my money now, as carelessly as she'd spent everything else I'd ever given her. That night, I sat in my home office with the Leica back in its proper place, but the satisfaction I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I found myself staring at the stack of bank statements and tuition receipts, seeing them with new eyes. I opened my laptop and began researching the university's financial aid policies, particularly the sections about parental support and withdrawal procedures. I read about dependency status, about what happened when parents could no longer afford to pay tuition, about the options available to students who found themselves suddenly responsible for their own education costs. As I read, I began to understand something that had taken me far too long to see. I held more power in this relationship than I'd ever realized. I'd been so focused on providing for Hailey that I'd never considered what might happen if I simply stopped. I opened my calendar and circled a date 6 weeks away, the deadline for next semester's tuition payment. Then I reached for my phone and dialed the university's financial aid office. "Hello?" I said when someone answered. "I need to inquire about changing a student's dependency status. My daughter is about to learn some important lessons about the value of things." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a man with a mission. Every evening after school, I sat in my home office organizing documents with the methodical precision I usually reserved for lesson planning. Bank statements, tuition receipts, rental agreements, transfer records. I assembled a comprehensive picture of exactly how much I'd invested in Hailey's education and lifestyle. The numbers were staggering. In 4 years, I'd paid over $60,000 in tuition alone, not counting room and board, her apartment rent, monthly allowances, textbooks, and countless emergencies that always seemed to require immediate financial intervention. I'd taken on summer teaching jobs, weekend tutoring, and had delayed my own retirement savings to fund her college experience. Meanwhile, Hailey had contributed exactly $0 to her own education. On Friday evening, I met Miles at Murphy's Bar, a working-class establishment where teachers and mechanics could afford the beer, and nobody judged you for showing up in clothes that had seen better days. Miles was already at our usual table, nursing a bottle and reading something on his phone. "You look different," he said as I sat down, "more focused. What's going on?" I ordered a beer and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been doing some research." "About what?" "About what happens when parents stop paying for college." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Frank, tell me you're not thinking of doing something you'll regret." "The only thing I regret is waiting this long." I opened the folder and showed him a printout from the university's website. "Did you know that if a parent withdraws financial support, the student can apply for additional aid? They can take out loans, apply for work-study programs, even qualify for grants based on their own income rather than their parents'? That's a hell of a thing to do to your own kid." "Is it? Or is it finally teaching her that actions have consequences?" I took a long sip of my beer. "Miles, she sold my father's camera for headphones. She mocked our family's history in front of the entire community. When I asked her to pay me back the money it cost to recover it, she laughed at me." Miles was quiet for a moment, turning his bottle in slow circles on the scarred wooden table. "What did Diane say about all this?" "That I'm too soft. That I created this problem by never setting boundaries." I laughed bitterly. For once in my life, my ex-wife might be right. "So what's your plan?" I pulled out another document, a form I'd downloaded from the university's financial aid office. "Next semester's tuition is due in 4 weeks. Instead of paying it, I'm going to file a change of dependency status. Hailey will become an independent student, responsible for her own educational expenses." Jesus, Frank, that's nuclear. "No, nuclear would be cutting her off without warning. This way she'll have options. She can apply for loans, find a job, maybe even discover what it feels like to work for something instead of just expecting it to be handed to her. Miles studied my face with the careful attention of a friend who'd known me for 40 years. "You're really going to do this. I'm really going to do this." The next morning, I had an unexpected encounter that crystallized my resolve. I'd stopped by the campus bookstore to pick up some supplies for my classroom when I spotted Hailey near the cafe section with two of her friends. They were sitting at a table covered with shopping bags from expensive stores, their voices carrying in the way that suggested they'd been talking for a while. "The thing is," Hailey was saying, "my dad is so predictable. He gets all dramatic and upset, but then he just pays for whatever I need anyway. It's like having a really reliable ATM." Her friends laughed appreciatively. One of them, a young woman with perfectly straightened hair and designer sunglasses, shook her head in mock sympathy. "Parents are so weird about money, like they're the ones who chose to have kids. Why do they act like supporting us is such a burden?" "Exactly," Hailey agreed. "And the whole thing with the camera was so typical. He acted like I'd done something unforgivable, but then he just went and bought it back himself. I mean, if it was that important, why didn't he keep it locked up or something?" The third friend, a young man I recognized from the community center incident, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Did you ever find out what he paid to get it back?" "No, but who cares? It's not like he can't afford it. He's been saving money for years." Hailey pulled out her phone and showed them something on the screen. "Besides, look what I got with the camera money. These headphones are amazing, and I still had enough left over for that weekend trip to Chicago." I stood frozen behind a display of university merchandise, listening to my daughter reduce our relationship to a financial transaction. In her mind, I wasn't a father who'd sacrificed to give her opportunities. I was a reliable source of funding, nothing more. That afternoon, I drove to the university's financial aid office. The building was modern and efficient, designed to process the hopes and dreams of thousands of students into manageable paperwork. I asked to speak with someone about changing a student's dependency status and was directed to a small office where a middle-aged woman named Sharon Tate reviewed my documents with professional sympathy. "Mr. Mercer, I have to ask, is this decision based on financial hardship or are there other factors involved?" I thought about how to answer that. "Ms. Tate, I've been supporting my daughter's education for 4 years without any contribution from her. She's never had a job, never applied for scholarships, never even asked what her education was costing. Recently, she sold a valuable family heirloom without permission and refuses to take responsibility for her actions. I think it's time she learned what things actually cost." Sharon nodded slowly. "I see this more often than you might think. Parents who realize that unlimited support isn't actually helping their children grow." She handed me a stack of forms. "If you file these, Hailey will be notified that her dependency status is changing. She'll need to meet with our office to discuss her options for the spring semester." "What kind of options?" "Student loans, work-study programs, academic scholarships if her grades qualify. She might also consider transferring to a less expensive school or taking a gap year to work and save money." Sharon's expression was kind but firm. "Mr. Mercer, I want you to understand. This will be a significant shock to your daughter. Are you prepared for her reaction?" I thought about Hailey's laughter when I'd asked for the camera money back, about her casual dismissal of our family's history, about her description of me as a reliable ATM. "Ms. Tate, I've been preparing for this conversation for 22 years. I just didn't know it until now." That evening, I received a text from Hailey that perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with our relationship. "Dad, can you send me an extra $500 this month? There's this study abroad program next semester that I really want to do. It's only $3,000 for 2 weeks in Europe. Educational opportunity. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "We should meet to discuss your plans for next semester." Her response came immediately. "Can it wait? I'm super busy with finals prep. Just send the money and we'll talk later. The deadline for the program is Monday. I turned off my phone without responding. Instead, I walked upstairs to my office, where my father's camera sat in its rightful place. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, and thought about the lessons Walter had tried to teach me about value and respect. "I'm sorry it took me so long, Dad," I said quietly. "But she's about to learn what things really cost." On Monday morning, I signed the dependency change forms and hand-delivered them to Sharon Tate's office. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with another text from Hailey. "Dad? Where's the money? The deadline is today." I deleted the message without reading it twice. The weeks that followed my filing of the dependency change forms were strangely peaceful. I continued my normal routine, teaching, grading papers, having dinner with Miles on Fridays. But underneath the familiar rhythms of my life, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. Like a storm building on the horizon, I could feel the approaching moment when Hailey would finally understand the true cost of her choices. On a gray December morning, I drove to Fairview Cemetery for what I knew would be my last visit before everything changed. The winter air was sharp and clean, cutting through the fog that had settled over the headstones like a blanket of memory. I knelt beside my father's grave, brushing away the leaves that had accumulated since my last visit. The granite was cold under my palm, but I could almost feel Walter's presence in the quiet morning air. "I kept my promise, Dad," I said softly. "I got the camera back. But more than that, I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me about value. It's not just about protecting things. It's about making sure the people we love understand why those things matter." A cardinal landed on the headstone, its red feathers bright against the gray stone. Walter had always said cardinals were messengers from those who'd passed on, carrying love and encouragement to those still fighting the good fight. "She's going to hate me for a while," I continued. "Maybe for a long time. But you taught me that sometimes love means doing the hard thing, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." That afternoon, I returned home and climbed the stairs to my office one more time. I opened the glass case and carefully lifted out the Leica, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. Every scratch on its surface told a story. Walter's careful maintenance during the war, the thousands of pictures it had captured over 7 decades, the love and respect with which it had been treated by everyone who understood its true value. Everyone except Hailey. I placed the camera back in its case and, for the first time since recovering it, turned the small key that locked the glass door. The click was barely audible, but it felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. My phone buzzed with a text message. Hailey, of course. "Dad, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I need to talk to you about next semester. The study abroad thing fell through, but I need the tuition money by Friday or I'll lose my spot in my classes. Can you transfer it tonight? Also, my car is making weird noises. Probably needs new tires. Love you." I read the message twice, marveling at her assumption that money would simply appear whenever she needed it. She had no idea that her financial safety net was about to disappear, no concept that her comfortable life was built entirely on my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for hers. But she was about to learn. Instead of responding to her text, I opened my laptop and reviewed the email I'd received from Sharon Tate that morning. The university had processed my dependency change forms and scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday, 3 days before the spring semester tuition deadline. Hailey would be required to attend, along with a parent or guardian. The email was carefully worded, designed to sound routine rather than alarming. Hailey would probably assume it was just another administrative formality, the kind of meaningless paperwork that universities generated constantly. She had no reason to suspect that her entire world was about to change. I spent the evening organizing my files one final time. Every tuition receipt, every bank statement, every record of financial support I'd provided over the past 4 years. The evidence of my investment in her education was overwhelming, but more importantly, It was evidence of her complete lack of investment in herself. $0 contributed to her own tuition, 0 hours worked to support her lifestyle, 0 appreciation for the sacrifices that had made her comfortable life possible. On Monday evening, my phone rang. Hailey's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. When I played the message back, her voice was strained with the kind of panic that came from approaching deadlines and empty bank accounts. "Dad, where are you? I've been texting and calling for days. I really need that tuition money, and now the university is saying I have to come in for some stupid meeting on Tuesday. Can you just transfer the money tonight so I don't have to worry about it? I have 3 finals this week and I can't deal with bureaucratic nonsense right now. Call me back." I deleted the voicemail and turned off my phone. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that made everything seem sharper and more defined. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one I wore to parent-teacher conferences and school board meetings, and drove to the university with the manila folder containing 4 years of financial records. As I walked across the campus where I'd invested so much of my income and hope, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Miles the night before. "You sure about this?" he'd asked. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." "There's no going back anyway," I'd replied. "The relationship I thought I had with my daughter doesn't actually exist. She sees me as a bank account, not a father. At least this way, she might learn to see me as a person." Now, sitting in the parking lot outside the financial aid building, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to manage Hailey's emotions or anticipate her needs. I wasn't worried about disappointing her or failing to provide something she wanted. I was simply a father who had reached the end of his patience and the beginning of his wisdom. My phone buzzed with a final text from Hailey. "Running late but on my way. This better be quick. I have a study group at noon and I still need to get that money transferred today." I turned off my phone and walked toward the building where my daughter was about to learn the most important lesson of her life. The financial aid office was exactly as I remembered it. Sterile fluorescent lighting, motivational posters about academic success, and the quiet hum of administrative efficiency. Sharon Tate greeted me with a professional smile and led me to a small conference room where Hailey was already waiting. My daughter sat slouched in a plastic chair, scrolling through her phone with obvious impatience. She wore the expensive headphones around her neck like a trophy, and her designer backpack, the one she'd bought with the camera money, sat carelessly on the floor beside her chair. "Finally," she said without looking up. "Can we make this quick? I have actual important things to do today." Sharon took her seat across from us and opened a thick file folder. "Ms. Mercer, thank you for coming in. We need to discuss some changes to your financial aid status for the spring semester." Hailey finally looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion. "Changes? What kind of changes? My dad handles all the financial stuff." "That's exactly what we need to talk about," Sharon said gently. "Mr. Mercer, would you like to explain the situation?" I reached into my manila folder and pulled out the stack of bank statements and tuition receipts I'd organized so carefully. The papers made a soft, rustling sound as I spread them across the conference table. 4 years of financial sacrifice laid out in black and white. "Hailey," I said quietly, "these are records of every payment I've made for your education. Tuition, room and board, your apartment rent, your monthly allowance, textbooks, emergency funds, everything." She glanced at the papers with the same casual indifference she'd shown the empty camera case. "Okay? Dad, I don't understand why we need to review old receipts. Can't you just pay this semester's bill so I can get back to studying?" Sharon cleared her throat. "Ms. Mercer, your father has filed for a change in your dependency status. Effective immediately, you'll be classified as an independent student responsible for your own educational expenses." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I watched Hailey's face as the meaning slowly penetrated, the way her eyes widened, the way her mouth opened slightly. the way her hand instinctively reached for her phone as if she could somehow scroll away from reality. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "It means," I said calmly, "that I'm no longer paying for your college education." The color drained from Hailey's face. "You can't do that. Dad, you can't just stop paying for school. I'm in my senior year." "I can, and I am." I pulled out another document, the dependency change form with my signature clearly visible. "I've been supporting your education for 4 years, Hailey. You've never contributed a single dollar. You've never had a job, never applied for scholarships, never even asked what your education was costing. Because you never told me I needed to." Her voice rose, drawing glances from the administrative staff in the outer office. "You always just handled everything." "You're right, I did handle everything. I worked extra jobs to pay your tuition. I delayed my own retirement savings. I sacrificed vacations and new clothes and a dozen other things so you could have opportunities I never had." I kept my voice level, factual. "And 3 weeks ago, you sold your grandfather's camera, a piece of our family's history, for $800 to buy headphones." Hailey's hands were starting to shake. "Dad, that was just a camera. It was old and nobody was using it. It was a 1952 Leica 3F that your grandfather carried through the Korean War. It was worth over $3,000. I watched her face as the number hit home. "You sold a $3,000 family heirloom for $800 because you couldn't be bothered to research what you were throwing away." $3,000? The words came out as barely a whisper. "When I asked you to return the money so I could buy it back, you laughed at me. You said I was being dramatic. You told your friends I was a reliable ATM who would always pay for whatever you needed." Hailey's legs seemed to give way, and she slumped further into her chair. Her hands were trembling now, and I could see the panic building in her eyes as she began to understand the magnitude of her situation. "Ms. Mercer," Sharon said gently, "you do have options. You can apply for student loans to cover the remaining semester. You can look into work-study programs or part-time employment. Many students successfully fund their own education." "But I don't know how to do any of that," Hailey's voice cracked. "Dad, you can't just abandon me like this. I'm your daughter." "You're my daughter," I agreed, "but you're also an adult who's never learned the value of anything because everything has always been given to you without effort or appreciation." I stood up, gathering my papers with the same calm precision I'd used to organize them. "The camera is back where it belongs, Hailey. I paid $800 of my own money to recover something you had no right to sell. Now you're going to learn what it feels like to pay for something yourself. Dad, please." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I'm sorry about the camera. I didn't know it was worth so much. I'll pay you back, I promise." "With what money? You've never earned $1 in your life." "I'll get a job. I'll do whatever you want." I paused at the door, looking back at my daughter, really looking at her for the first time in years. Underneath the designer clothes and expensive accessories, underneath the entitlement and casual cruelty, I could see the frightened young woman who had never learned to stand on her own. "Hailey," I said quietly, "I hope you do get a job. I hope you learn what it means to work for something, to sacrifice for something you want, to understand the difference between cost and value. Maybe someday you'll understand that this isn't abandonment. It's the last lesson I can teach you." Sharon was explaining loan applications and work-study programs, her voice professional and encouraging. Hailey was sobbing, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. The expensive headphones had fallen to the floor, looking suddenly cheap and meaningless in the harsh fluorescent light. I walked out of the office and into the clear December air, leaving behind 22 years of unconditional financial support and beginning whatever came next. Behind me, I could hear Hailey calling my name, her voice breaking with the weight of consequences she'd never had to face before.